I said I can work. Liam's small fist slammed against the faded blue lunchbox, his voice trembling but fierce. Across the cafeteria, billionaire Elias Vance froze. No one had ever spoken to him like that, least of all a child. The boy opened the box with shaking hands, revealing nothing but a crumpled note. "I'm sorry, there's no food today. I'll try again tomorrow. Love, Mom." The man who had built empires felt his throat close. Realizing the hunger in front of him was his doing. What would you feel standing in his place? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. Elias Vance had spent most of his adult life behind tinted windows and polished boardroom tables. At 45, the billionaire investor was known for his sharp instincts, his relentless drive, and a taste for the kind of luxury that few people would ever even glimpse. Yet for all the wealth that surrounded him, the estates in the Hamptons, the glass office in Manhattan, the private jet idling on a runway, he carried with him a quiet emptiness he could never quite explain. Deals were won, numbers soared, but each victory faded as quickly as the ink dried. It was on a clear Tuesday afternoon in Queens, New York, when his car slowed near a modest elementary school tucked between old brick buildings. Elias hadn't planned to stop. He rarely strayed from his schedule, but the sight of children laughing in the courtyard pulled him in with unexpected force. He parked a block away, loosened his tie, and walked through the gates, carrying nothing but an envelope meant for the school's donation fund. The inside smelled faintly of chalk and warm bread from the cafeteria. Teachers waved to students hurrying down the halls, and Elias felt suddenly overdressed in his tailored suit. Still, he pressed on, telling himself this visit was nothing more than a gesture of goodwill. He met briefly with the school secretary, left the envelope on her desk, and politely refused any recognition. On his way out, he paused by the cafeteria, drawn by the noise of children at recess. Rows of long wooden tables filled the room. Some children unpacked colorful lunchboxes, others balanced trays from the school's meal line. It was noisy, messy, alive. But in the far corner, he noticed one child sitting alone, a little boy, no older than 7, with short brown hair. He had placed in front of him a faded blue lunchbox that clearly held no weight. Instead of eating, he was carefully pretending. Arranging invisible plates, pouring imaginary drinks, speaking softly as though hosting a fine restaurant. Elias stopped. The scene was at once endearing and devastating. He drew closer, his polished shoes clicking softly against the tile. The boy looked up, surprised at first, then smiled with a kind of brightness that disarmed him. "Welcome, sir," he said seriously, his small hands folded. "Would you like a table?" He sat down awkwardly at the low bench across from him, his knees bent almost to his chest. "If you have one available," he answered, playing along. The boy's eyes lit up. "Of course. Today's special is a cheese sandwich with magic sauce, and the dessert is a surprise." He opened the lunchbox with a flourish. For a moment, he expected to see nothing. Instead, tucked neatly at the bottom was a folded scrap of paper. Elias's eyes caught the writing before he quickly closed the box again. In careful handwriting, the note read, "I'm sorry there's no food today. I'll try again tomorrow. Love, Mom." The words hit him with the weight of a hammer. He had read financial statements that cut companies in half, seen contracts that moved millions, but nothing in his life had ever pierced him like that single line. The child, sensing his glance, closed the box quickly and went back to pretending, stirring the air with an invisible spoon. Elias forced a smile, lifting an imaginary fork. "This sandwich is delicious," he said, his voice thick in his throat. The boy's smile grew even wider. "It's my secret recipe. Only special customers get to try it." He nodded, chewing on emptiness. But inside his chest, something shifted. He had spent years chasing significance in profit margins and quarterly wins. Yet here, across from a child with nothing but a worn-out lunchbox and an imagination strong enough to hide his hunger, he felt a sense of truth he had been missing. The room around them blurred. He no longer heard the clatter of trays or the chatter of other children. He only saw his small hands miming the service of food. He didn't have his innocence protecting him from the harshness of reality. And in that moment, the billionaire, who thought he had everything, felt his eyes burn hot. He blinked rapidly, swallowing against a wave of emotion he hadn't expected and certainly hadn't prepared for. "Do you come here every day?" he asked softly. "Yes," the boy answered proudly. "Except when it rains too much. Then my restaurant closes." He leaned in closer. "But tomorrow will be open again. Will you come back?" Elias hesitated. He had never promised anything to anyone outside of contracts and boardrooms, but something about his hopeful eyes left him no choice. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'll come back." The bell rang, signaling the end of recess. The boy closed the empty lunchbox with practiced care and carried it off as if it were full. Elias sat alone for a long moment, staring at the spot he had just vacated, haunted by the image of that folded note. For the first time in years, the man who measured his life in billions walked back to his car feeling utterly poor. And he knew with a certainty that unsettled him that the promise he had made to that little boy was one he intended to keep. The next day, Elias Vance walked through the school gates carrying a brand new lunchbox wrapped carefully in a paper bag. He had chosen it himself that morning from a small shop near Wall Street. A cheerful design, bright red with prominent stars. Inside, he had packed a real cheese sandwich, fresh fruit, and a small chocolate bar. He had told his driver not to wait. This was not a quick stop anymore. It was something he intended to do with his own hands. When he entered the cafeteria, his eyes searched for Liam Carter almost immediately. The boy sat at the same table in the corner, the faded blue box placed in front of him as if he were about to open his restaurant once more. He saw him, his expression shifting from surprise to delight, and he waved him over as though he were his most important customer. "I saved you a table," he announced. Elias smiled and set the bag down on the table. He opened it slowly, pulling out the star lunchbox and placing it before him. "I thought maybe your restaurant deserved an upgrade," he said. The boy's eyes widened as he touched the box with reverence. He opened it carefully, and when he saw the real food inside, his mouth fell open. "This is for me?" Elias nodded. "But only if you promise to share with your customers." The boy laughed, the sound so pure that it seemed to light up the dim room. Without hesitation, he began dividing the fruit into small pieces, calling to a few classmates nearby. "We're serving a special today." His voice was proud. Children gathered, giggling, curious, and Liam handed them slices of apple and little portions of the sandwich. He gave away more than half before finally taking a bite himself. Elias sat quietly watching as the children around him cheered him on, their laughter filling the space. Liam's restaurant had become real, not because of the food, but because of the joy he carried with him. He realized that what he had brought wasn't just lunch. It was dignity, the ability to belong without hiding. When the other children returned to their tables, Liam leaned forward, his voice lowering. "My mom says not to take things from strangers," he admitted. "But you don't feel like a stranger." Elias's throat tightened. He kept his voice gentle. "Your mom sounds like someone very wise." "She is," Liam said quickly. "She used to work at a big factory in Brooklyn. She made car parts. She worked a lot, but then they said they didn't need her anymore. She cries sometimes, but she tells me it's going to be okay." Liam looked down at the star box, his small fingers tracing its edges. That's why I had to pretend yesterday. I didn't want anyone to know. Elias froze. Brooklyn. He knew that factory. It was one of his own holdings, a manufacturing company he had acquired years ago. His mind reeled as he remembered the quarterly reports, the restructuring orders, the layoffs. The name Carter had never crossed his desk, but the decision that had uprooted her life had passed through his hands. He felt the air leave his chest. For a moment, he wanted to excuse himself to push the thought away as coincidence. But Liam's eyes were fixed on him with the kind of trust that allowed no room for denial. He nodded slowly. "Your mom must be very strong," he said softly. Liam grinned. "She is. She tells me to keep drawing and to keep smiling. She says, tomorrow will always come." From his backpack, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to him. It was a drawing done in bright colors, 3 people sitting at a table together eating. A woman with long brown hair, a little boy, and a tall man in a suit. "This is me and Mom," he explained, pointing to the first 2 figures. Then he tapped the man in the suit. "And that's you. You came to dinner." Elias stared at the drawing for a long time. Something inside him cracked open. He had spent his career erecting walls between himself and the people affected by his decisions. Numbers and projections had always insulated him from names and faces. But here, in a child's drawing, he saw himself not as a distant executive but as family. "Do you want me to keep this?" he asked carefully. "Yes," Liam said, "because if you keep it, then you have to come back. Otherwise, it won't be true." He folded the paper with care and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Then I'll come back," he promised. The bell rang again, and Liam packed up his new lunchbox, clutching it tightly as if it were treasure. Elias walked him to the classroom door. Other parents waited in the hall, greeting their children, but Liam walked alone. He turned once more to him before disappearing into his class. "Don't forget," he said firmly. Elias left the school with the drawing pressed against his heart. He had entered this place intending to give a small gift. Instead, he had walked out carrying a responsibility he could not ignore. The echo of the boy's words, "That's you. You came to dinner," followed him all the way back to his car. As the driver opened the door, Elias hesitated. For the first time in years, his next move had nothing to do with profit or prestige. It had everything to do with a little boy who believed that tomorrow could be better and who had trusted him to be a part of it. Elias Vance had never walked through the narrow alleys of Queens with a sense of dread before. He had visited the city for board meetings, for dinners in ornate halls, for photo opportunities that painted him as a man of vision. But this time was different. This time he wasn't stepping into a penthouse or a hotel suite. He was following a 7-year-old boy to a small apartment above a shuttered laundromat. The stairwell smelled faintly of damp stucco and old detergent. Liam climbed quickly, his star lunchbox bouncing at his side. Elias followed more slowly, his polished shoes echoing in the narrow corridor. He stopped at a door with peeling paint and pressed his ear against it before turning the handle. "Mom," he called softly, "I'm home." The apartment was barely larger than one of Elias's guest bathrooms. A small bed stood in the corner, a thin blanket folded carefully across it. A hot plate sat on a counter beside a cracked sink. The light came from one window, its curtain faded and patched. On the table lay a stack of unopened envelopes, their red lettering visible even from where he stood. Overdue bills, warnings, final notices. Liam set his lunchbox down and hurried to the figure lying on the bed. Isabella Carter was not old, mid-30s. Elias guessed, but illness and exhaustion had carved deep shadows beneath her eyes. She turned her head slowly, revealing sharp cheekbones and lips pressed tight with determination. Even in her frailty, there was a kind of strength that commanded respect. "This is Mr. Cole." Liam announced proudly as though introducing royalty. "He's the one who brought me the new lunchbox." Isabella pushed herself up against the pillow, her movements deliberate, betraying fatigue she tried to hide. "Mr. Cole," she said quietly, her New York accent soft but clear, "I don't know what to say. My son doesn't usually bring home strangers." Elias inclined his head, unsure of how to respond. He felt like an intruder in this room, where every corner spoke of survival. "Your son is extraordinary," he said at last. "He has a way of making the world brighter." Isabella's lips curved into a faint smile. "He carries more than a child should. But he keeps us both standing." Her eyes shifted to Liam, who was unpacking his drawing supplies onto the floor as if nothing in the world was wrong. Elias hesitated before speaking again. "Liam told me you worked in Brooklyn, at the car parts factory." For the briefest moment, something flickered across Isabella's face. Pain, pride, maybe both. "Yes," she said simply. "I worked there for 11 years. My mother worked there before me. We thought it was secure. But then the orders slowed. The manager said costs were too high. And one day, they gathered us in the break room. They read names off a list. Mine was one of them." Her words were steady, but Elias heard the weight beneath them. He knew that list. He had signed the directive himself. He remembered the meeting in Rome, the advisors urging cuts, the charts that made it look like the only logical choice. To him, it had been numbers on a spreadsheet. To her, it had been the dismantling of a life. "I'm sorry," he murmured, though the words felt pitifully small. Isabella gave a short laugh, not cruel, but resigned. "Sorry doesn't pay rent. Mr. Cole, sorry doesn't keep the lights on. But I am not asking for pity. I found other work when I could, cleaning offices at night, mending clothes for neighbors. It was never enough, but it was something. When I became sick, well, Liam learned to do more for himself. That's the hardest part, watching your child carry burdens he should never know." Elias felt the air grow heavy. His eyes fell on the lunchbox Liam had set carefully on the table. The bright stars glowing against the dim room. It looked almost out of place in such surroundings, like a burst of hope in the middle of defeat. He realized then that the small gift he had brought meant far more than he had intended. "Why didn't you ask for help?" he asked, his voice low. Isabella straightened slightly. "Because help always comes with strings. Because people look at you differently once they know you cannot stand on your own. I wanted Liam to believe his mother was strong, not broken." Elias swallowed hard. He thought of the gala dinners he had hosted, the charities he had supported with checks signed over fine wine. He had told himself he was doing good. Yet here, in this modest apartment, he saw the faces behind the statistics he had treated as abstractions. He saw the cost of efficiency written in the hollow of Isabella's cheeks and the quiet courage of her child. Liam interrupted the silence by rushing over with a new drawing. This time he had sketched a small house with 3 figures standing outside. "That's Mom, that's me, and that's you," he explained. "See, we're all together." Isabella looked at the paper and then at Elias, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You've only known him for 2 days, and already he's drawing you into our lives." "Children don't see the world the way adults do," Elias countered. "They believe what they feel, not what they calculate." Elias met her gaze without flinching. "Maybe that's what we've forgotten. Maybe children are right more often than we admit." For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of unasked questions hung in the room. Elias wanted to tell her the truth that he was not just a visitor, not just a wealthy man who had stumbled into their world by chance. He wanted to confess that the decision that had ended her job carried his name at the bottom of the page. but the words lodged in his throat. If he told her now, would it break the fragile trust that was forming? He looked again at Liam, who was humming softly as he colored the roof of the little house. The innocence in his movements only deepened his resolve. He could not undo the past, but he could choose what came next. "I don't want to be another stranger who disappears," he said finally. "I want to help, not as charity, but as a commitment. Your son deserves more than empty promises." Isabella studied him carefully, weighing his words. Pride battled with necessity in her expression. At last she nodded, though her voice remained firm. "Help him first. If you can do that, then we will see." That night, as Elias left the small apartment, the air of Queens felt different. The city's beauty had always been in its grand skyscrapers, its parks, its wealth of opportunity. But now, for him, its meaning was bound to a worn-out apartment above a laundromat, to a mother fighting to stand, and to a little boy who believed a star lunchbox could hold a feast. He walked back into the night, carrying Liam's drawing folded neatly in his pocket, and the heavy knowledge that the cost of his decisions had a name, a face, and a family he could no longer ignore. The following week, Elias Vance stepped into the marble lobby of his company's headquarters in Manhattan, with a weight in his chest he could no longer ignore. His board of directors was waiting upstairs, eager to discuss quarterly earnings and new acquisitions. But Elias had only one thing on his mind: Isabella Carter and her son Liam, the small apartment in Queens, the stack of unpaid bills. The look in Isabella's eyes when she spoke of her lost job. They had become more real to him than the balance sheets spread across his desk. The boardroom was bright and polished, a long glass table surrounded by men and women in tailored suits. They rose when he entered, then settled quickly as the meeting began. For years Elias had commanded these sessions with precision, every word measured for efficiency. But today his voice carried something different. "We need to revisit the layoffs in Brooklyn," he began without preamble, "particularly those that took place at the car parts division." A murmur swept across the room. One director leaned forward, his tone clipped. "That decision saved us millions. The factory was underperforming. We can't afford to reverse it." Elias's eyes were steady. "It may have saved money, but it destroyed lives. People who gave years of service were dismissed like numbers on a chart. I signed that order, and I intend to correct it." Another director shook his head. "Elias, this isn't personal. It was business. If we start reopening every decision because of sentiment, we lose credibility with investors." The old Elias might have agreed, but the image of Liam's drawing burned in his pocket like a brand. He leaned forward, his voice firm. "This is personal. That's exactly the problem. We've made it impersonal for too long. We hide behind numbers and forget they represent families, children, futures. If we have credibility issues, they come from forgetting our humanity." The room fell silent. No one dared to challenge him outright, but the unease was clear. Elias knew he was pushing against a culture he had built himself, a culture of ruthless efficiency. Still, he pressed on. "I want Isabella Carter reinstated immediately, with fair compensation for what she lost. And I want a review of every layoff in Brooklyn. We'll prioritize rehiring where possible." The directors exchanged wary glances. One finally spoke. "You're asking us to rewrite precedent. Investors will ask why. What do we tell them?" Elias answered without hesitation. "Tell them we are investing in people. Tell them that we refuse to profit at the expense of dignity. If they can't understand that, then maybe they're not the investors we need." The words startled even him, but once spoken, he felt their truth resonate. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about stock prices or quarterly reports. He was thinking about Liam opening his lunchbox and finding nothing inside. The board pushed back for hours, arguing risks and warning of shareholder revolts. Elias listened, but his resolve never wavered. By the end of the meeting, the first steps were in motion. Isabella would be offered a new position in Brooklyn, one that matched her skills and recognized her loyalty. And more importantly, Elias had planted the seed of change within the company itself. That night, he drove to Queens personally to deliver the news. Isabella opened the door, her expression cautious. Liam ran forward, star lunchbox swinging, his face lighting up when he saw him. "You came back," he said as if he had never doubted it. Elias crouched to meet his eyes. "I promised, didn't I?" Then he turned to Isabella. "I've spoken with the board. You have your job back. But not just that. We're creating new policies to ensure what happened to you doesn't happen again." Isabella's face tightened. "Why would you do this? Out of guilt? Charity?" Elias shook his head. "Out of responsibility. Out of respect. You deserved better, and I failed you. This isn't about pity. It's about making things right." For a moment she said nothing, studying him with weary eyes. Then she nodded slowly, though pride still lingered in her voice. "I don't want favors. I want to earn it." "You already did," Elias said softly. "Now it's time we honor that." In the weeks that followed, Elias went further. He launched a program called Lunch for Every Child, ensuring that every student in Queens public schools received a free meal each day. What had started with a single lunchbox became a citywide initiative, and soon other regions were watching. Newspapers wrote about the billionaire who had changed course, about the man who had once been known for ruthless efficiency, but was now speaking openly about responsibility and care. At the school cafeteria, Liam no longer sat alone pretending to serve invisible food. He became the unofficial host of the new meal program, proudly handing plates to his classmates. Elias visited often, not as a benefactor making a show of generosity, but as a man learning how to show up. One afternoon he brought him a new drawing. This time the table was longer, crowded with children eating together. He had drawn himself at the head, his mother beside him, and Elias at the other end smiling. "Now everyone gets to eat," he explained. Elias felt something stir in his chest that no business victory had ever given him. It wasn't pride, it was belonging. The board continued to grumble, investors continued to question, but Elias no longer cared in the same way. He had seen what real wealth looked like, not in ledgers, but in the sparkle of a child's eyes when he knew tomorrow would bring food. Not an apology note. One evening, as he walked out of the Brooklyn factory after a long day, workers stopped to shake his hand. Some looked skeptical, others grateful, but all recognized that something had shifted. He wasn't hiding behind glass walls anymore. He was here among them, carrying the same air of responsibility they had carried all along. And when he returned to the small apartment above the laundromat, Isabella met him at the door with quiet strength. "You've changed more than my life," she said simply. "You've changed my son's future." Elias nodded, humbled. "He changed mine first." It was the truth he carried with him everywhere now. Not the numbers, not the headlines, but the memory of an empty lunchbox and the promise he had made to fill it, not just for one child, but for many.